My name is Megan Quinones. I'm a Food Corps AmeriCorps service member, and this year you can call me Miss Megan, Miss Quinones, or Miss Q, whichever one works best for you. Now, we know normally Food Corps members would be with you in the classroom, but things are a little different this year for all of us. But I'm still really excited to be with you all, even if I'm at home, and I can't wait for us to try new things together all year long. So today we'll be trying a new thing, and that's Macintosh apple bread. Now, if you've tried apple bread before, can you just raise your hand for me for a second? Some of you may have tried it, some of you may not have tried this before. I actually have never tried apple bread before, so I'm really excited to make this recipe with you all. There are actually lots of different kinds of breads you can make out of apples, like we're doing today, but you can also use other fruits and veggies. You may have heard of banana bread, carrot bread. Can you take a moment, pause this video, and turn and talk to the person next to you, or even someone at home, about if you could have any bread made out of any fruit or veggie, which bread would you want to try? I'll give you all a moment to talk about that. Okay, so we're back and we're ready to make some apple bread today. Before we start, there are some very important things that we need to go over. First, before you ever handle food, you should go and wash your hands for at least 20 seconds in warm and soapy water. And there's lots of different ways you can go about washing your hands. You can sing songs so you know you're washing them for long enough. You can even just count, whatever works best for you. Another thing is, today we're going to be using knives, we're going to be using a vegetable peeler, and we're also going to be grating lemon. And so it's really important to remember, when you try any new recipe that's using something sharp in the kitchen, you need to make sure you get a parent's help, a guardian's help, just someone older than you in the house who has more experience, because these things are sharp and we want to just make sure that we're being safe and having as much fun as possible. I've already washed my hands, so I'll give you all a second to pause this video and then we can get started and cut these apples. So the first thing we'll want to do today when making apple bread is actually peel our apples. So you can do this using a vegetable peeler, which we have here. And again, from the help of a grown-up, you could even use a knife to peel these apples. So we're just going to do this pretty quickly. It's important to know that it could take you a few times to get a good grip of the vegetable peeler on the apple, and that's okay. So a peeled apple will look like this. You notice there's no skin on it. So what we'll want to do next is begin to cut our apples into small little chunks. Again, we'll start by cutting the apple in half, as you see here. And then from here, we'll simply cut the apple into quarters or 4 different pieces. After we cut them, the easiest thing I do is just go ahead and make sure you're getting the core of the apple out, because we definitely don't want any seeds in our belly or in our bread today. I'm taking the time to remove the core and the seeds from the apple, and it'll look a lot like this. So we want no apple stem in our apple bread, no seeds, and no core. So once it's all done, the apples will look a bit like this in slices, and from there we can simply cut this in half and then cut the piece we cut in half into half again. And we'll just cube it. And the thing about apples is they always look a little different from each other. Some might have bruises, some might have a little bit of bumps, some could be really smooth. And a lot like humans, apples are beautiful and delicious no matter how we look or how we feel. And so that's another thing that's important to keep in mind when we're cutting up these apples. Even if there's a little bit of a bruise, feel free to use it. One of the things that inspired me to make this apple bread with you all today is my love for fall. And whenever I think of fall, I just think of apples, different warm spices, maybe even going to a pumpkin patch or apple picking. And I'm actually not from Boston. I'm from Washington State, and we're known as the Apple State. And so it only made sense for me to be with you all here today making this delicious apple bread. Just cut up the very last of our apple slices, as you can see here. Remember, this recipe needs 5 Macintosh apples, and that could take a long time to cut, so I didn't show myself cutting all the apples. But I have them here in this bowl, and as you can see, there are plenty. So the next step of this recipe is to include lemon zest, and we're going to need exactly half a teaspoon of lemon zest. So I'm going to pour that in, and I really love to cook with my hands, so I'm just going to spread it around in here. Now I know all of you may not have zested a lemon before, and so in just a moment I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, we have our apples all mixed up, looking and smelling delicious. Just so you all know, to zest a lemon, all you have to do is take your zester. You can also use a cheese grater, and that can help you zest a lemon, and you can even use a knife. But again, when you're using a knife or even a zester, they are sharp items, so be sure to have someone around in the house, or even just get someone older than you to help you with this part of the recipe, because later there'll be lots of different things you can help with. So you take the lemon and you just put it against the grater or zester, whatever utensil you're using, up and down, and then you turn it over and you see you have zest. Our lemon and apples mixed together, we can't forget the most exciting part about this recipe. We're going to be adding 1.5 cups of sugar to these apples to allow them to break down, along with the help of the lemon, which is very acidic. So we have our sugar in with these apples, and normally I'd mix this with my hands as well, but I'm just going to use a spoon until we can get it a little bit more incorporated. And then you can definitely get in there with your hands and start mixing. After we have this mixed together thoroughly, you'll want to let it sit aside for about 30 minutes. And again, the sugar as well as the acidity from the lemon zest are going to help these apples break down and give us something very delicious when we put these in our bread. Alright, now we wait. Alright, now while our apples, lemon zest, and sugar is kind of off to the side and doing its own thing for 30 minutes, we're going to start the rest of our apple bread, and we'll be starting with our dry base. So right here I have a bowl of 2 cups of all-purpose flour. I'll be adding to this bowl 1 teaspoon of baking soda, making sure it all gets in there. We also have 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg. Now, this is the dry base, so now we're going to whisk the dry ingredients together just to make sure they're fully incorporated. Whisk, whisk. Alright, now we can put this off to the side. We'll be using it again very soon. From here, we're going to start to mix our wet ingredients. We'll be starting by using 2/3 of a cup of vegetable oil. So what we'll do is pour this in the bowl. Next, we'll want to add 2 large eggs. When we're adding our eggs, we want to be very careful not to get any eggshells in this mixture. As you can see, I cracked this egg by simply hitting it against the side of the bowl. That gives you a nice clean crack and helps limit the possibilities for eggshells getting in. The last wet ingredient we want to include is 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Now, just as we did with the dry ingredients, we're gonna whisk these wet ingredients until they're just combined. As you can see here, I'm using a fork instead of a whisk. You're completely fine to use either. You can even use a spoon. It's just whatever works best for you. You also may have noticed when I was mixing together these ingredients, I kind of had them all to the side and ready to go. This is a French term called mise en place, which simply means things in place in English. And it's an expression used in cooking and baking a lot of the times because when you're preparing recipes, things are very precise, especially when it comes to baking. Some might even say baking is a science, which is important to keep in mind. So having your ingredients there and ready to go is a great way to be prepared and have an exceptional baking experience. Now I'm going to put these wet ingredients to the side and bring back our dry ingredients. You probably remember our delicious spice and flour mixture from earlier. Now I'm going to take our Macintosh apple mixture and just spoon this into the flour. You also notice we put the sugar in and it was still a more grainy consistency. The acid from the lemon not only softens the apple but makes the sugar more of a syrup consistency. From there, we're just going to take the spoon and we're going to mix the flour and apple. We don't want to over mix this, just kind of mix it around till it's well combined. Okay, now that we have our apple mixture combined, we're going to begin to gently pour in our wet ingredients. And we're going to do this in 2 different rotations. So we'll add a little bit of the wet ingredients and then mix it with the dry, well, semi-dry now that we have our apples in there. And you just want to mix until it begins to combine. Alright, now let's put in the rest of our mixture. Now that we've combined our delicious apple bread mix, we want to do something called buttering and flouring the pan. Now when you're doing this, you don't have to use traditional butter. You could also use something like vegetable shortening or even cooking spray. And all I'm doing is kind of wiping the butter up and down in the pan. And after I do this, I'm going to add a little bit of flour to the sides, shake it around, and then pour in our batter. And this actually helps keep the bread from sticking to our pan. Now that we've added some sort of non-stick agent and flour, we're ready to begin pouring our delicious apple bread butter into the pan. We'll be cooking our apple bread at 350 degrees for about 50 to 60 minutes. A good way to check if your bread is done is by inserting a toothpick in the center. When that toothpick comes out clean, that's normally a good indication that the bread is ready. I'll just lift it up here so we can get a view. You can see our Macintosh apples that we took so much time carefully chopping. Just gonna let it wiggle back in place. All right, we're ready to stick this in the oven. All right, BPS, let's get this bread. Now you'll want to let the bread cool for about 1 to 2 hours before removing it from the pan. Okay, BPS, now we're on the very last steps of making this apple bread recipe together. I hope you've enjoyed making it. I know I certainly have. Now, I just want to show you all what this apple bread looks like. Get a good rotation here. And now, before we eat this bread, I just want to take a minute and we can start with holding the bread. And think about how this feels in your hand. You know, feel the different parts of the bread. You can see there are apple chunks in the bread. It feels a little crumbly. The outside is hard-ish and the inside is more moist. And now, keeping the bread in your hand, I want you to move it towards your nose. What do you smell? I smell cinnamon. I smell apples, warm fall spices. It smells super yummy. But before we take a bite of this yummy bread, I know your mouths are probably watering. I want to take a moment and just think about the land that grew the ingredients to make the bread and be thankful for that land. And now think about the people who helped tend to the land and helped grew the apples and be thankful for those people. And now take a moment and look at the apple bread in your hands and be thankful for those hands because together we made something amazing. And finally, after one last smell, feel free to give that apple bread a taste. I'm just gonna pull mine apart so I can keep feeling the different textures. Delicious. I would have to say I tried the bread and I love the bread. How about you all let me know how you feel about this bread? Did you try it? Did you like it? Did you love it? Let me know. I can't wait to hear. Thank you so much for taking the time to make this apple bread with me and welcoming me into your classrooms and homes. Until next time, bye BPS.